Hello, my name is Nicole Haldoupis, and I'm the marketing coordinator at Breakwater Books. I'm excited to welcome you to our virtual fall showcase. We respectfully acknowledge the land on which we operate as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk. We would also like to recognize the Inuit and the Innu as the original people of Labrador. Our fall book release season runs from September to December. There are 4 new fiction titles, 1 nonfiction, and 1 cookbook, and we can't wait for you to hear each of these authors share their work. Our first reader is Trudy J. Morgan Cole, reading from the second book in her Cupid's trilogy, Such Miracles and Mischiefs. This historical fiction book takes off where the first in the trilogy, A Roll of the Bones, leaves off. It adventures across the first 3 English colonies in the Americas, Newfoundland, Virginia, and Bermuda, and highlights women's colonial experience. Nancy Ellis needs all her ingenuity to survive in the hands of lawless men. Ned Perry crosses the ocean to find her, while Nancy's employer and friend, Catherine Guy, must rebuild a home on the harsh shores of the Newfoundland. Patty Musgrave Quinn said in Atlantic Books Today that this novel is a special opportunity and one that Newfoundlanders will be particularly proud of. Trudy J. Morgan Cole is a writer and teacher in St. John's, Newfoundland. Her historical novels include By the Rivers of Brooklyn, Most Anything You Please, A Sudden Sun, and That Forgetful Shore. She's fascinated by the forgotten or ignored stories of women in history and loves to create fiction out of the gaps history leaves behind. Trudy is the mother of 2 young adults and lives in Rabbit Town in the heart of St. John's with her husband, Jason, and the world's most beautiful rescue dog. Please welcome Trudy.
Hi, I'm Trudy Morgan Cole, and I'm reading a scene from my novel, Such Miracles and Mischiefs, Book 2 of the Cupid's trilogy. The wood Nancy stood in was a strange one. The trees were not like those around Cupid's Cove, the only forest she had ever seen till now. They were much taller and had a sweet, unfamiliar scent. They were sparse near the shore, but grew closer together as she pushed farther in, through dense shrubs and bushes. This country, whatever it was verdant and fertile, and the ground seemed dark and rich. There was a sultry warmth to the air. They must be much farther south than the newfound land. Before she left Bristol, if she had ever imagined being on a ship at sea, being wrecked on a foreign shore, a fantastical enough conceit in itself, she would have been certain that a little walking would bring her to a town or village, for people were everywhere. Now, after a year in the newfound land, she knew that was true only in England. In the New World, there could be miles and miles of shoreline or forest with no settlement at all. There were the natives, of course, somewhere deep in the woods. But as she had never seen one herself in a whole year in Cupid's Cove, they seemed as alien as talking beasts or the men whose heads grew beneath their shoulders, the fantastical creatures of sailors' tales. Even as these thoughts ran through her head, she was walking along a path that led through the trees away from the shore. Surely the very fact that there was a path must mean there were men here as well, though animals might make paths through the bush. Large animals. She chilled at the thought. The light was dim, filtered through the trees, and now she thought she could hear the sounds of someone or something else moving through the forest. Was it a wild beast? Or one of the pirates coming after her? Or some other person who dwelt on these shores? She wondered if there were people here, what manner of people they would be. They might be Spaniards, or French, or Dutch, or the natives of the country. If they were English, she would need a name and a story, but anyone else would only see her as a ragged, English-speaking boy and deal with her accordingly. She had been walking through the forest now for, could it be about half an hour? It was hard to tell, and she could barely see the sun. She was tired and thirsty, but more pressing than either of those was the fact that she was now sure she could hear someone else, not behind her on the path, thankfully, but somewhere off to the side. And then she stumbled through trees into a clearing, and he was waiting for her, a knife in his hand. Nancy realized she had her knife in her hand also. When had she taken it from her belt? She faced the stranger, each of them wary. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and his eyes glittered at her from a dark face. Then, in a flash, she recognized him. You, she said, trying to drop her voice to sound less like a woman's. You were one of the captives aboard the ship. He lifted his hands slowly and spread them wide. No chains now. You will not try to make me serve you. Will you cook? He laughed. She hesitated, then put the knife back into the sheath on her belt. You know me. You are trying to look like a sailor? I thought to, yes. He laughed again. You look like a maid in breeches. But you might fool a stranger in the dark. His voice was very deep and his accent unfamiliar. Not quite like those of the Spanish sailors whose cries she remembered, but something like them. Where are you going? She wondered how he had got free of his shackles to escape the ship. He had sheathed his knife too, and his posture was easy now. As you are, I think, as far from those men as I can get. You were their captive also? Yes, they took me from my home. He gestured for her to come closer, and she did, standing beside him on the path now. It may be safer for us to travel together. Do you think there's a town about anywhere? Do you know where we are? He shook his head. I lived one time in Cuba and sometime in Santo Domingo. I do not think this is a place I've seen before. There are many islands in the southern seas. I know nothing of these parts at all, Nancy admitted. I was born in Bristol, in England, and went straight from there to the Newfoundland, to a place called Cupid's Cove. Ah, those places are all far in the north, where the sea and air are cold. This is a kinder land, though the men are no kinder. He was silent a moment, looking at her, then said, It may be you fear a man of my complexion more than you fear pirates? Nancy had nothing to say to that. Save for this man and his fellow slaves on the ship, she had never been close enough to a black man to speak to him. There had been Africans among the lively mix of men on the Bristol docks, but she knew nothing of them. She thought of saying, I fear no man, and then, I fear every man. One felt as true as the other.
Our next book is the debut novel, The Blue Moth Motel by Olivia Robinson. Lisa Moore calls this book luminous, shot through with unexpected, transformative beauty. Here is a queer love story alive with intensity. A brilliant new portrait of a family, of sisters, of lovers, of mothers. A remarkable novel about voice, and Robinson's voice is so strong, so true, sparkling like a crystal, as bright can be. She shows how talent can be harrowing and how it can make us whole. This book is magical. Ellie, a digitally lit youth ambassador, said, "This book was like a lullaby. It's one of those that you read for hours without realizing because you become so enveloped in the characters and the storyline." Olivia Robinson is originally from the Annapolis Valley, Nova Scotia, and recently moved from St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador to Charlottetown, PEI. Her work has appeared in Riddle Fence, Cargo Literary, and the UPEI Arts Review. In 2020, a draft of The Blue Moth Motel was shortlisted for the Newfoundland and Labrador Credit Union Fresh Fish Award. Olivia launched this book in PEI at Beaconsfield Carriage House in collaboration with The Bookmark and UPEI. Please welcome Olivia.
Hello, my name is Olivia Robinson, and I'm going to be reading to you from my novel, The Blue Moth Motel. I'm just going to read from the beginning because that seems like the best place to start. Chapter 1, Lewis, UK, 2013. On Wednesday, I lose my voice. The doctor looks like an anglerfish from the deep sea, the one with its own light dangling over the top of its head. But she is not really like a fish at all, with her close-cropped blonde hair and efficient manner. She examines my vocal cords through a tube in my nose, which makes it tingle and go numb. It bleeds after she removes the tube, and I sit with a tissue pressed to my face while she scribbles in my file. "It's as I suspected," she says as she continues to write. "You'll have to rest for 3 months, no singing, and speak only when absolutely necessary. Marcia will book you a follow-up appointment." I had convinced myself, in the couple of months between the initial scratchy feeling in my throat and the increasing hoarseness of my voice, that it was only a persistent cold. "Then what?" I say, holding my free hand against my throat. "Well, we might have to consider surgery," the doctor says. She hands me a pad of paper and a golf pencil. "Will I be able to sing again?" "I can't promise you anything," she says, "but try not to worry too much. No more talking now." She removes her head mirror and turns off the light. When she spins around on her chair to face me, I notice her bright green eyes, and she becomes a creature of the sea again. She doesn't look much older than me, mid-20s at most, but she must be, and I wonder when in her life she decided to become a doctor, or if it was decided for her. Everything will be fine, the doctor says, and I want to ask if anyone ever believes her when she says that. When I moved to the UK at 18 on a 2-year work visa, which has since been extended, it felt like an escape. I know it's a cliche, the desire to leave your younger self behind and become someone different, but if I hadn't left the Blue Moth when I did, it would have held me there in the same way it trapped my sister. Our entire lives were defined by that ramshackle building with its faded blue siding and crumbling swimming pool. I wanted to see something new, be someone new. But I hadn't realized how hard it is to live on your own. I got a job cleaning Airbnbs and an additional job waiting tables at a pub. I auditioned for church choirs and was accepted into the second one I tried out for. I want to move up to a paid soloist position so I can travel and sing with other choirs, but so far that hasn't worked out. I take private lessons twice a week with a Scottish woman who has a small studio space on the second floor of her flat. We work on my breathing and how I can better position my jaw. Sometimes, on the weekends, I perform a short set in the afternoon at the pub where I work and get to keep the tips. The thought of having to tell everyone what has happened makes me want to crawl into bed for a week. Still holding the tissue to my nose, I stand as the doctor opens the door of the examining room. I thank her with a nod of my head and walk down the hallway to the reception area with its green plastic chairs and smell of antiseptic. Marcia, the receptionist, sits behind the desk with a pink cardigan draped over her shoulders. I avoid eye contact and rush down the stairs out into the fresh, early spring air, which holds a hint of rain. There are palm trees in the south of England. People plant them in their gardens, and somehow they survive the winter. This is only one item on a long list of things I have learned about living in the UK, but for some reason it's the one that surprises me the most. I had never seen a real palm tree, so seeing one in the garden of a stone cottage with a thatched roof altered my idea of the place. The winters here are different too. The temperature rarely drops below freezing. What would be considered a dusting of snow in Canada is enough to cancel schools and halt traffic here. I rent a room in a house in Lewis, a town I heard of because of Virginia Woolf. The woman who owns the house, Susan, works as a cleaner too. She helped me get the job cleaning the Airbnbs. Every evening when I return home, she is on the soft green sofa in the kitchen with a glass of wine, watching Strictly Come Dancing or Landscape Artist of the Year. I often join her, accept the offer of a glass of white wine, and sit at the table. Susan sips her wine slowly and sinks deeper into the sofa until she drifts off. We don't know each other very well, but on the evenings when she falls asleep on the sofa, I put a blanket over her before going upstairs to my room. She looks younger and less tired when she's asleep. After leaving the doctor's office, all I want to do is sleep. But it's much too early, barely 3 o'clock. And the bed I'm thinking of isn't the one in my room at Susan's house, but the one I used to share with my older sister Nora at the Blue Moth. There's a difference between a home and home. One is the place you return to most nights. The other is the place to which you feel an obligation. Sometimes they're the same place, but not very often. People try to forget past versions of themselves, but I like to think that pieces of who we were remain in the places we lived, our words lingering in the fabric of the bedroom curtains.
Next, we'll hear from Governor General's award winner, Kevin Major. Following One for the Rock and Two for the Tablelands, the latest installment in his Sebastian Sinnerd mystery series is called Three for Trinity. With the creation of the Atlantic Bubble, Sebastian can offer a tour of the scenic and historic Bonavista Peninsula to a small group. On the last night of the tour, an actor collapses at a socially distanced theater performance. Sebastian rushes to help, but Lyle Mercer has been poisoned. When Sebastian goes undercover as an actor to try and discover the killer, he's taking a risk in more ways than one. Will it upend his romantic relationship with Police Inspector Ailsa Bowmore? Kevin Major is the author of 21 books, fiction, literary nonfiction, poetry, and plays. His first novel, Hold Fast, is considered a classic of Canadian young adult fiction, and was recently released as a feature film. As Near to Heaven by Sea, A History of Newfoundland and Labrador was a Canadian bestseller. Land Beyond the Sea is the final book in Major's Newfoundland trilogy of historical fiction, which also includes New Under the Sun and Found Far and Wide. He and his wife live in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. They have 2 grown sons. Please welcome Kevin.
I'm Kevin Major, and I'm reading this evening from 3-4 Trinity. This is the third book in the Sebastian Synard Mystery series that I started a couple of years ago, first with One for the Rock, followed by Two for the Tablelands. So this one takes place in Trinity in Bonavista Bay, and it's the home, of course, of Rising Tide Theatre. And the protagonist and his group, he's a tour guide, and he's brought a group to Rising Tide for one of their evening performances. It doesn't go quite as expected. A prerequisite for being hired by Rising Tide is that you be multi-talented. If you can't sing or play an instrument, you better darn well have something else besides acting up your sleeve. Donna Butt is a part for you in Shenanigans, the evening variety show, regardless of the fact you're beat out after just spending 2 hours parading around Trinity in the sun and wind as part of the pageant. With the season's company reduced, it seems only the cream of the crop has been hired. They are an amazingly talented lot, merging seamlessly between the roaring opening musical number, fiddle, accordion, and voices in high gear, to a recitation called Gutted by COVID, composed just for the show, to a skit based on Ted Russell's yarn from the years before Confederation called The Hang-Ashore. In Newfoundland, the word hang-ashore needs an explanation which is forthcoming from one of the characters before they're long into the skit. A good-for-nothing, a slacker, someone too lazy to fish, who'd rather stay home and cause trouble. In this case, the hang-ashore is Solomon Noddy. In he comes from stage left, looking every bit the part in a check shirt and an overly wide tie, a mismatch for the plaid jacket and baggy pants. He's unsteady on his feet, looking like he hit the bottle one too many times, very definitely gone to seed, edging towards the farcical. His dialect is slurred and not decipherable by the audience, even though we're mostly Newfoundlanders. He's taken a seat in a courtroom behind a railing and is just about to hear the charge of theft. He squares himself up, prepared to lay out a defense. Suddenly, without warning, Solomon Noddy collapses. He hangs illogically over the railing. The audience roars. His only movement is the heave of his chest generated by a prolonged round of coughing. The audience laughter comes to an abrupt end. The infectious perils of open coughing have been so ingrained in us over the past several months that everyone instantly checks that their face masks are secure. The audience bubbles seated closest to the stage stiffen, prepared to retreat. The most theater savvy among us are wondering if what is happening is not just all part of the skit. Solomon Noddy is unceremoniously dragged off stage, causing a few people to chuckle tentatively. But then the storyline falls apart. The remainder of the cast stands mute and miserable, clueless what to do next. And tearing her way from the back of the theater, where she's been watching the performance, is Donna, hair flying, sputtering behind her face shield so intensely that it fogs her view of the audience. She abruptly snatches it away. Sorry about that, folks. No need to worry. He's been tested. We've all been tested. It's his asthma. Probably mislaid as puffer. You know what the young crowd is like. Sit back, folks. Sit back. Enjoy the rest of the show. Meanwhile, I'll make sure he's okay. Which is meant as much for the cast left on stage as it is for the audience. The space is cleared of the skit's props in record time. Donna is hardly out of sight before the fiddle is back in action, displacing the pall that has pervaded the theater. The show goes on. These things happen. I glance at Ailsa. She's also not so sure. She leans close to my ear. I think I better check this out. She abandons her seat, the tour guide behind her, both of us trying to look inconspicuous as we take the same side entrance to backstage that Donna has taken. We hear her before we reach the cluster of people around Solomon Noddy, who by this time has finally stopped coughing. Good God, where's his puffer? Lyle, if you're drunk, I'll have your friggin' head. We watch one of the stage hands dig the inhaler out of Lyle's pants pocket. Ailsa steps forward. I'm trained as a first responder. Donna snaps a look at her, but before there's time to ask the question, Ailsa flashes her identification card. Inspector Bulmore, RCMP. She's part of my tour group, I add quickly. Move back, boys. Give her room. An RCMP officer can have that effect. Ailsa kneels on the floor next to Lyle, makes a quick check of his pulse, forces open each eyelid, rests a hand on his chest, puts her face closer to his. She glances up at Donna. Heart rate is good, but his pupils are constricted and his breathing is abnormal. You should get him to a hospital right away. Adding as an afterthought, no smell of alcohol on his breath. It sets Donna in high gear. Get in the back of seat of my vehicle, she barks, tossing a ring of keys in the direction of a stagehand, and one of you fellows scrabble in there with them. Soon they're gone, out a back door and around the side of the theater to her forerunner, now spitting gravel as it backs up the access road and tears off in the direction of Clarenville Hospital, 70 kilometers away. No mind to the fact that an RCMP officer is staring into the trail of dust.
How about an intermission of sorts? If you're craving a food break, we've got just the thing. After making it through flooding, ferry, and supply chain delays, we're thrilled to introduce you to Salt Beef Buckets, A Love Story, the debut cookbook by Amanda Dorothy Jean Bulman. This book is an affectionate tribute to the land, the people, and their meals. Connect with Newfoundland folklore, farming, foraging, and much more. Andy recently said of the book on NTV's Silver Linings, I want when you to buy it for it to be crisp and new, and I want a week later for it to be splattered with kitchen oils. That would be my dream. I want it to be a book that you use. Amanda Dorothy Jean Bulman is a chef, writer, stand-up comic, and librarian. She believes passionately in teaching farming, foraging, and food skills to young people. You can find her work online with CBC and in Harrow Smith magazine. Also, she makes the best biscuits in the world. Whizzing us through her ginger cake recipe, please welcome Andy Bulman.
My name is Andy Bulman, and I'm the author of this new book called Salt Beef Buckets, A Love Story, available through Breakwater Books. And it's a culinary history of Newfoundland. And I wrote essays and recipes that sort of explore the folklore behind different recipes and food traditions and food ways in Newfoundland and Labrador. One of the things I do in the book is I went through the archives. I spent a whole year in the archives researching old recipes. And I take these sort of older recipes from the early 1900s and onwards, and then I modernize them. I add things like miso and lime, and I sort of bring them forward. Today we're making a ginger cake. It's gonna be delicious, and it's based on a recipe from 1905 that I found at the archives at the Rooms in St. John's, Newfoundland. And that recipe was before measurements were standardized, so it called for things like a coffee cup of sugar. So I've played around, tried to recreate what the recipe was looking for, and then I modernized it by adding fresh ginger and pomegranates and lime juice. And I hope you like it. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is mix your dry ingredients together. This is 2 1/3 of a cup of all-purpose flour, cinnamon, cardamom, ginger, black pepper, and 2 teaspoons of baking soda. And then you want to whisk this. The reason we always whisk dry ingredients is to aerate the flour. You're gonna have a fluffier cake and like a better sort of crumb if you take the time to do this. And I know you're gonna skip it because everyone always skips it, but you shouldn't. You should do this. So once you've got a decent amount of air in your flour, things look soft, you've broken up any major clumps, this should smell like cinnamon and ginger. There should be a good amount of scent wafting off this. If there's not, you've probably using old spices. Spices should be replaced after 6 months. Okay, so we have our dry ingredients, they're ready to go. So the next thing we're gonna do is set this aside. We don't need it right now. And then you're gonna take 1 cup of grated ginger, and it should look like this. For a lot of ginger cake recipes, you squeeze the moisture out of the ginger, but this recipe, we keep it all in. There's tons of flavor in that sort of watery juice that comes from the ginger, so why would we get rid of it? 1 cup of ginger, and that goes in your food processor. And then we're gonna take an apple and we're gonna grate it as well. Oh, neat trick. I recently learned that you're supposed to grate like this instead of like this. Much safer and more stable. Okay. There, and this is our apple, and that goes in with the ginger. And then we're gonna add 1 cup white sugar. Now we're gonna blend all these ingredients together. Great. So you want this texture of your sugar, ginger, apple mixture to be like the consistency of applesauce. It really only takes about 30 to 50 seconds. Only takes a minute, max. Great. So you're gonna take this and you're gonna put it in the bowl, and this is gonna be your bowl for your wet ingredients. You're gonna use your rubber spatula and just get everything out. The next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take 1 cup of fancy molasses. You wanna buy the molasses that has no preservatives. Local is better, of course, if you can find a local molasses. Now we're just pouring this into our wet ingredients. And now we're using 1 cup of canola oil. You want to use a neutral oil. If you use olive oil, it has flavor, so it's going to change the sort of flavor composition of the cake. So if you don't have canola oil in your home, sunflower oil is totally fine. Safflower oil is fine. Any sort of vegetable oil is fine. If you just don't want to use an olive oil or a peanut oil or coconut oil, that's going to change the flavor. Unless that's what you want, in which case it's all good. I like to think of recipes as a spine, and you sort of add your own vertebrae. You can mix them up. These are just like a guideline. That's 1 cup oil, and we're gonna add 1 cup of water. But before we add that water, we're gonna whisk these ingredients together. Great, you're gonna slowly pour your water in. Great, so we've made a well in our dry ingredients, and we're just gonna add about 1/3 of our wet ingredients. Just like that. And then we're gonna incorporate it, and then we add an egg. We mix the egg in, and then we're gonna add more of our wet ingredients. I break it into thirds, you know? Do it about 3 times. It's a very thin batter, but don't worry, it's still gonna cook really, really nicely. When you have a thin cake batter, that just means you're gonna have a really dense crumb on your cake. It's gonna be very rich, it's gonna be very, very moist, as opposed to sort of an airy cake like an angel food cake. Then you'd have a drier looking batter. So this is a very loose batter, and that's what we want. That means we're gonna have a gorgeous, really rich, dense cake. So the last thing we do is we put it into our cake pan. I grease my pan. This cake is really hard to get out of the pan. It's so dense and so liquidy, it wants to live here and not ever leave. So you want to grease your pan really, really well, line it with parchment, and then pour your batter in. You're gonna use your rubber spatula to get every little last bit out. We don't want to waste any. Your cake is gonna go in the oven at 350 degrees for 40 minutes. At 40 minutes, you're gonna test it. I use a toothpick, I just poke it. If it comes out, there's no batter on it, it's done. Once your cake is done, you're gonna let it rest, and then you're gonna turn it upside down. You're gonna glaze it with a lime glaze and decorate it as you want. I used pomegranates, and I used lime and candied orange pieces. There's all kinds of different things you can do. Some candied rosemary would be really nice, some thyme, but I'm pretty happy with this.
New work by Claire Wilkshire is always a pleasure to read, and we hope you'll enjoy her reading from her story Mothers in her debut short fiction collection, The Love Olympics. Abigail Dawn in Teagle Lifestyle calls the collection an all-encompassing take on love. Wilkshire approaches each short story with authentic experiences that encourage readers not to put the book down. Lisa Moore said, "Here, a mastery of style and depth of character are linked in a pinky swear or a contact sport or anything else which is full of promise, lifelong friendship, some hurt and tenderness." Claire Wilkshire is a writer, editor, translator, and teacher living in St. John's with her husband, writer Larry Matthews. They have 2 adult children. Maxine, which came out with Breakwater in 2013, was Claire's first novel. Her short fiction has appeared in publications such as Grain, The New Quarterly, Event, and The Fiddlehead. She's a founding member of the Burning Rock writing group. Please welcome Claire.
Hi, my name's Claire Wilkshire, and I'm going to read from the first story in my book, The Love Olympics, which is called Mothers. When children visit, when they come back for Thanksgiving or Easter, when they arrive at the airport with tired smiles, wearing clothes that have not smashed against the inside of a washing machine in recent memory, when they sit around the kitchen table like adults, which they are, with their partners, telling tales of adult lives which they're living, more or less, they have opinions. They know how to do new things, and some of those things you do not yourself know how to do. Make a good grain bowl, map bus routes on an app. And now you would like to know how to do those things. They are aware of some global political issues that escaped your attention because you were immersed in some other thing last week, and all you can say is, "The Italian ambassador? No, I didn't hear about that." You wonder how they learned these things about work and ambassadors when you were not there to tell them. They tip kitchen chairs back or hop up on the counter and sit in the corner, swinging their legs and telling funny stories about profs or co-workers whose names and personalities you mostly know by now. You say, "Oh, Adrian, he didn't," as if you knew Adrian, as if you'd ever laid eyes on him, which actually you have, because you've creeped him on Facebook. But no one needs to know that, and it is, in any case, normal. It is akin to industrial espionage. It is learning things about the other parties involved in the life of your child that you might potentially have cause to know at some future point. Because the fact that they're not living with you at this moment doesn't mean they're gone forever, lost to you, that you're just a tiresome old fogey prone to repeating yourself and fretting about boring details. You're mildly confident you haven't actually reached that stage yet. In fact, you might at any point be called upon to perform some task involving protection, assistance, possibly heroic action. And knowing what Adrian's about is the kind of intel that could hypothetically be useful there. Over the long weekend, they burrow into the couch with blankets. They spend the morning watching videos, sending messages, snorting as they point out funny memes to each other. They spend hours gearing up to work on assignments for courses, and you start to wonder if you should make suggestions, turn off the music, set a timer. But all of a sudden, when the afternoon is already well underway, they slave away for half an hour and suddenly, bingo, the assignment's done. They wonder if they can defrost something for lunch. After lunch, they eat the grapes, all the grapes. They eat chips, they locate the crackers and the good cheese. You come into the kitchen when they've gone out and gather up the plates, the phone chargers, the half-empty Diet Coke bottles, the bowls with remnants of oatmeal or pea soup, mugs with dregs of lemon tea. You rinse the coffee grounds out of the bottom of the French press and put the guitar back in its case and fold the throw and load the dishwasher and turn it on. You wipe down the table, and soon comes the thud of the front door, and they are back. Their arms circle around you, and they are laughing. You are laughing. They are young and strong and warm, except for the frozen hands they hold at the back of your neck to make you squeak. And you put out more food. You tell them to help themselves, to settle in, to be comfortable, to leave their laundry in a pile in the hall because you can throw on a load for them later. And they laugh again because they don't care about laundry. But really, you would like to do their laundry. You look at a pair of feet and say, "Are those my socks?" And a finger is placed on your lips while someone says, "Shh." You would like to do whatever would make their day easier. You want them to feel good here, to want to come back, to bring their light and their warmth and their smiles into the house and deposit them everywhere like flotsam, like little bunches of grapes, close and fat and sweet. The night before they leave, they traipse into the bedroom while you're in the ensuite with the door open. They drape themselves over your bed, one on top of the comforter and the other underneath, one with limbs all sprawly, the other bunched up for maximal heat conservation. They're gazing up at the ceiling or onto the screen of a phone, and their words come out in little lazy clumps with long spaces between them as you brush your teeth and wipe your mouth. No one is addressing anyone in particular as you lift the edge of the comforter and crawl in, pushing gently at the nesting one who shuffles over a little to make room. And you're 3/4 asleep by the time they roll slowly over and brush lips up against your cheek and murmur good night. The bed heaves and they pad away to their rooms as you roll into the warm space they've vacated and try to pretend that they're still there, that the alarm won't go off in the middle of the night and set your heart skittering around like a baby goat, that you won't check the departures website and help load their bags into the trunk and wait until they've checked in, just in case, and walk them to the security area and squeeze them tight and turn away quickly, rubbing the back of your hand over your cheek and heading out in the dark to the cold, empty car.
Thank you again for joining us for our virtual fall showcase. Thank you to our authors for writing and reading from their work, and to our wonderful videographers for putting these videos together with us. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank our funders, the Canada Council for the Arts and the Canada Book Fund through the Department of Canadian Heritage, and the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador. We hope you'll check out these awesome books at your favorite local bookstore, at our shop at 1 Stamps Lane in St. John's, or on our website at www.breakwaterbooks.com.